So today on Coffee Isn't Lunch, we're doing something new and exciting. We've got a guest. We've got a guest,
Yay!
Maddie.
Who we got?
Our
Who's
first,
here?
our first ever guest is Conor James Doyle. How exciting are we? Hi, Conor.
Hello. I'm
Hi,
always like,
Connor.
am I allowed to start like saying hi until I've been announced, or do I
No.
pretend that I'm silently not doing it? I was like quietly in the background, like,
You're
yay.
announced. You're announced big time. And so we're dead excited to have Conor on today, to have you here, because we're going to kind of
Thanks
do
for
a
having me.
follow-up to the ADHD episode, which was episode 2, I think. Was it, Maddie? Episode
Yeah,
2.
yeah.
We wanted to talk a little bit more about ADHD, and we thought Conor would be a brilliant person, and he's one of our mates, so we've got him in to chat about that. And so we're going to do a follow-up to the ADHD episode.
Nice.
Sounds
Can't wait
good.
to get stuck in.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
So do you want to kick off, Maddie?
Yeah, man, I'll kick off. So we, on episode 2, we shared our experience because we're mindful that we don't want to decide what other people's experiences are. So me and Haley shared ours through kind of diagnosis journey and all that jazz. So I'd love to just hear what your kind of like your nice little story, your nice little journey of ADHD, what that was for you.
Your ADHD awakening. So,
Yeah.
for me, it was a good few years ago now. And I basically was at a very stressful point in my life. So I think where a lot of people get stuck with the whole late stage ADHD diagnosis thing and why it's happening way more now, and the reason a lot of people are, I suppose, are probably very skeptical of it, is because people are asking, well, how come it didn't affect you your whole life, or how come only later in life it seemed to pop up? But actually, it did affect everybody their whole life, but everybody figured out ways of adapting, or they ended up in jobs that really catered to it, or they, basically kind of fitted into a mold that suited them. And then I think when COVID happened, it chucked us all out of that mold and back into like, naked and afraid, into the vulnerable world of like a neuro kind of typical system. And we all had to adapt. And I remember that's when I turned to my online education business, which did quite well, like way better than I thought, which was amazing at the time. But then came all the business challenges that come with that. So I had to hire someone, I had to manage things, I had to do scheduling, I had to be on time for things, I had to plan, I had to have foresight. And then when you combine that with the sort of natural, consistent dopamine flow and regulation you get being a hairdresser behind the chair, which is, you go in, you do your appointment, you get that dopamine when it's done. Hopefully it's done well so that you don't actually crash and burn. And you're under that little bit of time pressure, but you have that bit of structure, you know where everything is, and you know exactly what you're doing that day. When you take that away, so now your dopamine's completely dysregulated, you don't really know what you're doing with your life. And then you combine it with complete lack of routine because the entire world is essentially on fire. And then starting a business that basically required a part of my brain that I'd never really had to use in that capacity before. It essentially just became like a pressure cooker of just extreme stress, extreme overstimulation, extreme sort of heightened symptoms that I would have gotten through my whole life of, like, let's say certain sounds, certain smells, certain environments would have really stressed me out. Forgetfulness became top tier to the point that I was like, what day is it? Like when you're sort of just waking up existing. And I remember actually having a conversation with somebody where I was like, because I'm also a total hypochondriac, where I essentially had read this case of a guy who got Alzheimer's at the age of 25. And I was like,
it's me.
Unfortunately, everybody. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell everybody this, but I actually have diagnosed myself with Alzheimer's because it was that severe that like so I'm diabetic, and I kept like forgetting. I was like, have I taken my insulin? Like, which is pretty dangerous. Like, especially if you overdo it or the overdose or whatever. And the more stress you get, and we know this now about ADHD, the more you stress you are, the worse your kind of your sort of, I don't even like saying symptoms, the worse those kind of traits become. And until it basically got to a breaking point, and I remember sitting in front of my doctor, fully dead serious, being like, I think I might have Alzheimer's. And she's like, okay, well, you probably don't. But actually, a client had ironically been the one who told me, she was like, it kind of sounds like ADHD. And this was a little bit before the sort of big awareness. And I was like, oh, I thought that was only kids. And I brought that to my doctor, and she was like, yeah, that actually sounds a lot more like what it could be. And when we went through a little bit of like school history, and it was always there, I just was always able to manage it because I would just in school, I was like, okay, I'm going to do more hands-on creative things. I'm going to do like music or, things that required a lot of mind-body connection that I could regulate. And then with my job, I was like, right, I'm going to go into hairdressing. So I naturally was regulating it. But when that sort of carpet was pulled from under me, all that fell apart. So yeah, it was a couple of years of sort of like humming and hawing about it, and then eventually got referred to a consultant, and we did the test, which was like, you're going through your whole life and stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people, including yourselves, probably feel like as you're going through it, you're like, you kind of feel almost like an imposter.
Yeah.
Like for me anyway, I was like, yeah, but I felt like I was like, am I just saying this? Am I just saying these things? Or like, do you know, like, I'm like, these seem like really obvious questions. But I didn't realize that the way that the diagnostics test is structured is they ask you the same question multiple different times throughout, but it's phrased differently or put in different situations. So they can catch people faking, essentially. So like, let's say they might say, are you on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your time management? If somebody says, 0, later on, because there's so many questions, they might give you a scenario where it's like, this is happening, how do you prioritize? And from that, they can kind of cross-check your answers. So it's actually a lot harder to fool than people think. And plus they look for like, references and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, and I diagnosed, super diagnosed. He was like, this is like
you aced
really, really, really high. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And I was nervous. I was a bit like, you feel a bit stupid because you're kind of just going through like basic things. And he was like, and then he pulled out this other thing. And he was like, we also have a lot of overlapping with like ASD. And I was like, oh. He's like, so there's a whole lot like, going on that would have made things quite difficult for you to just function in a sort of binary way. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it. And I always say that beginning because that's exactly what it is. It's not like what people hope when you go to a specialist that you're like, oh, great. I'm so glad I know that now. Here's some pills and, this is what you do. It's actually like now you have to almost retrospectively re-educate yourself, on your functionality. You have to disentangle what is ADHD versus what is like coping strategies that you've built that now need to be dismantled. You need to, basically reevaluate your whole life, but with this new knowledge and these new tools. So yeah, that was about 5 years ago now. I want to say 4 or 5, and still learning every day. So, but it's exciting.
That's interesting. I was thinking about when you talked about the questions in the diagnosis, in the assessment, because I felt a bit like going, like
this is everyone.
Like this question's too easy and too obvious. Like, you just think, yeah, of course. I just felt like it seems so, I don't know, it just seems like the questions seem too obvious to us.
Yeah.
But I think if I showed the questions to my friend who doesn't have ADHD, she'd just be like, no. Yeah. I was just like, this is, everyone's like this though. It feels like everyone's like this because you've been like this for so long.
Exactly.
You can't really
and
get that it's different to most people.
Exactly. Like so many things that I thought were universal were so not universal. So like like every now and then, because I'd say something like, oh, like, like I have this really weird one again. So a lot of mine ties into sensory issues. And I would have always been like, if the salon was really busy that day, I'd be kind of cruising on the dopamine of being like getting that stuff done. But as like it was getting brighter or like lights were reflecting in the mirror, or if people were talking beside me, I always left in a bad mood. And I'd always be saying to people, I'm like, oh, like when you just leave the salon every day, just like hating everything, and you sort of just have to like sit in a dark room by yourself for like an hour, and they're like, no, or like I'd have this really particular sensory thing where I can't stand the sound of people brushing their teeth.
Ooh, okay.
Or like the thought of somebody touching a sponge, like these kind of really specific things. I can brush my own teeth, thank God. But like if somebody brushes their teeth beside me, I just immediately leave the room. And I never really would explain it to people. And then like, like with partners or like family and stuff, they'd be like, why do you always flee? And I'm like, oh, like that horrible, like that like inside like melting feeling you get when the sound of somebody else brushing your teeth. And they were like, no. I was like, okay. And just like little things like that that were brought up in my diagnosis, where he was like, and I was like, yeah, but the way everyone, I remember him asking me one really specific question around chairs. He was like, what do you think about chairs? And I was like, hate them. And he was like, okay. But it was because I'd really struggle to like sit comfortably just like on a chair, But yes, it's exactly that. So much of it I thought was like just so universal to everybody.
I think one of the things and this really leads me to my next question, is that I think one of the reasons I thought it was universal, as you say, is because so many people around me were the same. Like I just thought this isn't unusual because the people who working next to me are the same. It felt, and I'm wondering if what you think about the prevalence of ADHD in the hair and beauty industry. Like, what are your thoughts around that, Conor?
I think it's well, the neurodivergents tend to attract other neurodivergents in the same way that you would have like people with specific interests attract people with specific interests. There's a different way of communicating, a different way of conversation, I think. So for one, from like a sort of peer kind of attraction set, if you find yourself really clicking with a particular group of people within a certain workspace, you're going to probably want to work there. So there's that side of it as well. But then the reason we see people being drawn more to sort of practical type jobs is again tying into that dopamine dysregulation. So I think it's just a natural kind of option for somebody in hairdressing. You get a lot of the same with a lot of artists, with a lot of, because one thing that we struggle with is staying kind of present, right? Because we can be distracted by a million things going on. We can be distracted by things in our head. And when we're forced, because we have that bit of pressure of like, oh shit, they've got like a time slot they're in and they're out for it, we have to be present. And that is like heroin. So you know what I mean? That, like, we physically have to like be so engaged with our hands and our body, and it's so rare that we're not thinking of anything else but what's directly in front of us. Plus then you get the regulated dopamine throughout the day, those regular kind of dispersed hits as every time you finish a client. So I think it's a natural thing that can happen within, that's why I think the prevalence is extra high with us. But if you kind of like zoom out a bit, you will see across the board, generally any kind of like very mind-body connected type careers tend to attract a little bit more of a neurodivergency. There's also, I think though, people can relate to then the ADHD experience but not be neurodivergent because of now their new habits, because of their jobs. So, for example, if somebody is now a lot more practically minded and that's how they kind of work and that's how they have learned to adapt, almost in the way that we adapt slightly neurotypical habits, they, adapt neurodivergent ones. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think there's a little bit of maybe background noise where it's all of a sudden the entire hairdressing industry is ADHD, where actually there's going to be probably a larger percentile than normal, but there's probably just a lot of people that are now relating to that experience. And I actually think either way, that's still a good thing because it allows us to broaden that conversation and just really look into all the spaces that we can make that more accessible, diagnosis or not,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I decided that Haley had ADHD, as I do. If I really like someone, I'm like, there's maybe a reason here. Mm-hmm. And we had that whole conversation where I was like, Haley, do you know how you do this? And you have this weird thing. And I was like, I wonder if it's maybe this. And she was like, is it? Because I thought that was just
could that be that? Yeah, well, I'm the same, right? Like, because it is quite genetic as well. And I remember like the most prevalent moment in my life was when I was diagnosed, and I was like sitting on the bus on the way home, and I walked into my family home, and my mom was sitting there, and I was like, you'll never guess what, like I'm after being diagnosed. And as I was in the middle of telling her, she stuck her hand into a candle, just like completely lost interest in the conversation, stuck her hand into a lit candle, burned herself, and then looked at me and was like, wait, what did you say? And I was like, oh my God.
It all makes sense.
Because one of my things that I would have struggled with the most was actually like, even growing up, was impulse control. I was so impulsive. And would really, like, sometimes I have to like clench my fists because like a stupid thought will come in that it's like, I don't know, throw that thing across the room, or like smash that thing that child just made ages making, or whatever, like things that like obviously you're like, you really have to be like, that's not socially okay. But it, like, the intrusive thoughts do give in sometimes. And I just watched in live action her stick her hand into a flaming candle, and I was like, you did this to me. So yeah, I definitely think you attract like what like. There's definitely a couple of my friends that I kind of like, sort of like head tilt. I'm like, but then there's also things that are just like personality traits that we've kind of acquired. But yeah, definitely you tend to attract like
so many of not so many, but a good handful of my friends have now sought diagnosis since I got diagnosed.
Yeah, same.
I was the first one who was like, I think I've got ADHD, and my friends were like, oh yeah, I can see that. And then since then, they're all
Hmm.
like, actually, I think I have, and they've all been diagnosed. And so it's interesting how we found each other anyway, long before we
Well, when you think about
even
it,
knew it.
yeah, if you think about it, like, so your friend groups generally tend to form because of mutual interests, but also mutual dynamics and mutual like understandings and mutual respects and stuff. And you really become aware of it if you're ever kind of thrust into a group of people who are quite neurotypical, because things that like, like let's say you might be going to a friend's event or something like that, and suddenly you're sitting down at this table of people, and a random joke that you've just said that it was completely pulled out of nowhere has to be explained, or potentially you found yourself having a conversation with somebody and you've kind of realized that, like, shit, I'm actually not really paying attention. They might have clocked it, or like things like that, which would naturally just make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but also them probably feel a bit uncomfortable.
Mm,
So when you exhibit those traits around somebody who responds positively to it, it is because they could potentially have followed that mad thought in your brain, or are really relieved for a bit of novelty in the conversation, or potentially, do you know what I mean? So it would draw you to each other in a sense without even like a formal diagnosis around it.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's
like they
about
don't
like,
see it.
yeah, go on,
Sorry,
madam.
gone. I was going to say they don't see it as rude. Like my mates and I can have like 5 consecutive conversations and just flip between them, and I keep hold of all the
Mm.
strings. I'll be like, oh, and then just going back to that thing I said half an hour ago, and that's taking us on this tangent, and like we all just follow it.
Mm.
But then there'll be like neurotypical persons like, how is anyone making sense of any of this? But I can just, yeah, like
Yeah,
it just makes sense. That's the only way I
Yeah,
can put it.
yeah. And it's even like those kind of in my friend group that are more of like a neurotypical nature are ones that actually the dynamic, we can complement each other so well. So Emma, who would be who's one of my best friends and also like manages a lot of my business stuff, is so like amazingly linear at the way she's able to think, but also still very creative. And when we started working together, what she couldn't understand was that when I plan something, I immediately just think of the very end product. So I immediately will just see it fully formed as like a video or a concept or a thing, and it's live. But she's like, but how do you get there? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, and actually we end up working both like opposite ends of the sort of spectrum and end up meeting each other in the middle and then filling in the gaps along the way. And it was actually really eye opening because I was like, but does everybody not do it this way? Like I thought, you have an idea and that's just it. This is exact, like I will see it fully formed in seconds. And it's actually called pull planning, which I found very interesting. So it's that like where you have your finished product completely like exactly, like sometimes I'll hear, let's say, a song and in my head I'll immediately think of the like let's say an Instagram or TikTok video that would go perfectly with it, the concept, like the haircut, the whatever. But I'll be like, right, so where will I do that? Like where would the day be in the calendar? Um, but yeah, I find it like there can be really good complementary spaces as well, I think, for everyone's brain to
Yeah.
function.
I think having neurotypical support people for me is amazing, because I always say it's
Mm-hmm.
like the Steve Jobs. I'm like the ideas guy. I'm like, I've got this seriously. I'm like, I've
Yeah.
got the idea. This is what it's going to be. But like, can someone else just do the boring stuff that's required to like get it to the point where it's
Mm.
really fun, where I can like take this over? I don't want to think about the details, but yeah, I think two of us would be really hard. I love having very lovely neurotypical people who just go, let's put this into practice for
yes.
you. Slush.
Yeah, it's like anchors.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'd really like to know because I don't think it's all doom and gloom, although it is genuinely really hard. What do you find like the hardest bit about having ADHD? But what do you find? Are there any good bits that you're like, I love that my brain works like
Oh,
this?
yeah, 100%. And this is even when I explain to people, because a lot of people would reach out to me on social media or maybe after a talk or something, and I'm always very conscious of the language of like negatives, of like what are the downsides of it, because I don't believe there is any downsides. Because essentially what it is the work that I do is just acknowledging that we all think in different ways, and it actually goes beyond even diagnosis at this point. And it's just actually then looking, well, how can we adapt our lives and our days to complement our unique brains, and I think when things become hard is when things aren't accessible to us, and I don't think that's our fault, because I think that's the issue, is that society hasn't caught up. And it's not just ADHD, it's you look at even like like even when it comes to things like disability, like how people identify with disability a lot of the time is the access of the services and the environments around them. So somebody potentially, and I know I'm speaking a bit out of pocket here because it's not my experience, but like somebody's kind of experience going into, let's say, a certain venue will really sort of highlight their experience depending on how it's accessible to them. If they're in a wheelchair, if they've got like easy ramps, easy access, whether versus steps. Do you know what I mean? So it comes down to, does that venue accommodate? And this goes broader then to the bigger thing when it comes to education, when it comes to learning, when it comes to working. Are we making our information giving us options of how we consume it, or how we choose to work, or how we choose to function? And I think what is hard is when those systems aren't accessible to us. And I think that goes across the board. I think that is what the difficulty is. Or when expectations are put on us that are very linear to a neurotypical brain. And even neurotypical people will struggle with that because there's different variation within that as well. So I think that's what's difficult, is when you're kind of met with this sort of resistance or a sort of lack of awareness. But one of the things I think is really helpful is just being able to bring that conversation forward. And I actually, like, one of the most powerful things is just being like, well, that's not accessible to me. And I often won't even really go into an ADHD thing because I think there is unfortunately a little bit of like eye rolling with the whole situation at the minute, which, you know, we can dismantle, we can get rid of, but it's like anything, when there's an awareness of it, there's a backlash to it too, right? So I actually often will say to people, you don't need to explain yourself that much. If you just say to me, that's not an accessible way for me to consume information, they're like, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like the golden word. And I'm like, no, I can't read like a spreadsheets, I can't do, or, you know, this, but this is how I would do it. And offering solutions, not just expecting always that somebody would have the solution ready for you. But what I think is amazing about like a neurodivergent brain is, and it's something that I'm so grateful for, and it's exactly what I was talking about earlier, like I can come up with solutions for things instantly. And almost like I've been in situations where I'm like, is that not obvious? But then like people will then, you know, something really mundane I'll do completely wrong, like, you know, push or pull a door, or, you know, something like that. And will consistently do that wrong for like, until eventually I'm corrected, or I realize the door opens better if you just pull it, you know, stuff like that. I think a neurotype or a neurodiverse brain really has capacity to think outside the box, because the box doesn't exist. It's just been smashed to pieces and is like roaming around by itself. I think they're probably some of the funniest people I've met, because, you know, a lot of comedians and stuff like that, it's the funniest things are what take you by surprise the most. It's what you'd least expect to hear. And my biggest trait for, if I'm looking at somebody and be like, I think they have ADHD, is if I find myself being like, where did they come up with that? Or like, how did they think of that? I think we play a really important role in just creative thinking and creative conversation, and you know, breaking the mold a lot. I think it's something that is massively valuable.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, for sure. We'd like to talk about your education a bit, Conor, because you're really, you know, setting it up for neurodivergent people. But first of all,
thank you.
We'd like to know, what was it like for you learning as a hairdresser in our industry before you were an educator? Like, how was that experience for you?
I'm really lucky in that the education that I did generally was always quite good. Like I have really fond memories of, like, you know, working with specific educators. But when it came to formal, more stuff like we're working with brands, or, you know, things like color specialist or anything like that, I found it very challenging, and I found it very unnatural. And this is, whenever I talk about this, there's always like a little bit of backlash, because loads of educators then go, that's not how I do my education and stuff. And I'm absolutely not saying that that's across the board. So just before anybody comes to me,
the caveats.
I am not criticizing educators as a whole. I am commenting on certain experiences where I basically just found it so unnatural, even before a diagnosis, that I'm like, we work on our feet all day, we talk and move all day, we are constantly stimulated, and now we're in a room for 7 hours, sitting down and completely silent, and our only way of sort of consuming this information or consuming this new media is to take notes or to take pictures, or put our hand up and maybe ask some questions. And again, that's not all experiences, but there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of that still happens. And further caveat, I'm not saying that doesn't work for some people. It absolutely does. And if you have an education model and you're booked, and all the people that are showing up are happy to do this, amazing. But I feel that there's a large demographic, again, diagnosed or not, that really struggle in that environment, because it's so unnatural to our day to day. it's so, for a lot of people, some of the work that I do is around, zooming out a bit again, not necessarily looking at ADHD, but how people's school experience shape how they learn. So if somebody has had a really negative school experience, and where a lot of hairdressers have, unfortunately, for a whole multitude of different reasons. We did some stats on that, and it worked out about 50% of hairdressers more or less didn't really enjoy school at all, with around 20 something percent hating it, like really, really not liking it. And if you go into an environment that reminds you of that, it creates a sort of background anxiety that does hinder learning massively. It hinders your ability to maybe interact, to ask questions, to make mistakes, all this kind of stuff. So the more I looked into it, the more I was like, I wonder, can we do this differently? Like, how would I want to do a course? If I've ever taught a course and I've walked away bored, then I know they've walked away 10 times more bored. So it's almost selfish in the sense that I'm like, I want this to be enjoyable for me, but I know if I can have a really good time doing it, I can share that and make it enjoyable. So I didn't have a traumatic time with the education beforehand, but it just felt unnatural to me in how some of it could have been delivered, for sure.
Yeah. And you give me a little throwback there, because I remember learning about colour theory in college, and I can just vividly remember how much I hated it. We were in like a lecture hall. We weren't even in our usual sort of classroom, and it was just like slides, but it was just all in the numbers. There was like no visuals to anything. I don't even think they brought like the colour wheel up, and I was like, and they just expected you to get it, and I was like, I'm not getting it, and I'm not stupid, but I just cannot get it the way that you're teaching it. And I feel like I've learned more from like short form videos of like yours and other colour educators, where you've just made it make sense in like 10 seconds, that I go, okay, that's how I had to learn. It's awful. It's a really awful experience. Yeah.
There's also like so much in every education system. There's so much unnecessary information. So I think you need to give people choice, because you could go and learn something. So let's talk about that lecture, for example, right? You could have done a million of them. And if I asked you to summarize that in 5 minutes, you probably could. And that's all that you've needed to know to get by, right?
Yeah.
So the way we do our education is that we kind of cut to that bit, and we give you the most essential bits, which is like condensed down to like just a couple of minutes. And this is all you need to really take away from this. But here are some expanded notes and pieces of information for the people who do want to delve in a little bit more, because I would be like that about certain things. And again, that's probably the more the ASD traits clocking in there. But like if the special interest comes in, I'm like, I'm going to learn every single thing about this. So I like that to be an option. But I also like to just for sometimes it's, especially with neurodiversity, all that's missing for us is the why. So when we provide people with a why behind any piece of information, they tend to remember it significantly better. And that why can be reduced from 10 lectures down to, because this. Oh, great. If you want more, here's this. If you want less, here's, that kind of way. So again, it's just giving people option, giving people choice, because I've been in situations like that as well. And I'm like, but what does it look like? Or what would happen if I did this instead? Or what if there has to be so many different caveats to just, I know there's the basics, we need to know those, but like, can they be made more efficient, or can they be, woven in with other pieces of information that turn it more into a storytelling type thing that makes the information relevant, instead of just remember all these numbers. This is what they do. This is what they don't do. Next, can be a bit clinical.
Yeah. Perfect. And you've answered my next question, because it was going to be, how did you weave that then into like your experience and weave that into your education? And I'm going to talk about your education in a second, by the way.
Great. Plug.
I will.
Can't get enough. Do you want me to answer that question?
Well, yeah, you can answer that question in another way. Yeah, for sure.
Like, how did I weave it in? Because to be honest, we're still figuring it out. So we've basically found there's kind of a couple of main pillars that we're kind of experimenting with at the minute. But one of them is around very much that, like how you weave in information with the more kind of memorable pieces of storytelling. So storytelling is one of those powerful ways of conveying information. So, for example, if we're talking about like color, let's say, if you put like a 4.3 on this client and her base is 3, she will do this. Whereas if you're like, oh, my client, whatever came in, and you give it backdrop, you give it stories, people remember it because they can put together a picture in their head and in whoever way that looks. But also what you're doing is you're subliminally educating as well. So again, if you circle back to that school experience thing, people can have a sort of immediate resistance if things feel, again, very like formal education. Whereas I like to talk as if I'm doing videos to my friends and stuff. And I'll always try and incorporate a little bit of humor, a little bit of visuals, a little bit of different ways that you can do things. But it's ultimately you're trying to. This is a very bizarre analogy, but it just popped into my head. You know, when you have to give like a dog a tablet, and you might just like wrap it up in like a little bit of chocolate or something like that. That's essentially what we're trying to do with the education, because we want it to be enjoyable through and through. And when things are enjoyable, we remember them better. But we're still figuring it out. We're still playing around with it for sure.
That's so true. I always say that if people have a good time, they remember the class as good.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And you learn when you're laughing and when you're having a good time, things go into your brain better and stuff. That's brilliant. I love that. And so before we talk a little bit more about your education, I'm just wondering if you have any strategies around ADHD that have worked really well for you, just like a quick tip you could share with people listening that like, this thing works really well for me.
Quick tip. I'm trying to scan through like 4 years of intense coaching.
Yeah, if you could just summarize that up in like a quick 30 seconds.
Like 30 seconds.
Yeah. I know, and I'm going to catch myself out now because that's literally what I've been like. And that's what the education does. So I think the self-talk is definitely one of the most important things, but that's years of journey, right? That's like figuring out how to like quiet that little bit of your head that you don't even think is happening, but is slowly chipping away at your confidence every time you get something wrong or you forget something that is maybe saying like, you know, oh, that was stupid, or you're dumb for doing this, or like, I can't believe I've done this again. And it can be more subtle than that, but it can be more sinister as well. Because I read a really good quote the other day that it's, you can't hate yourself into loving yourself. And it's like, it's so true, right? Because we, as, you know, people with neurodiversities trying to exist in a neurotypical society, when we don't match those things that they can do, we either externally, other people have told us that we're being dumb, or other people have criticized us, or we're like, why can't we be like them? And that little voice is actually a lot more prevalent than you even think. Even if you think you're so good to yourself, all this kind of stuff, you'd be amazed if you tune in for a day how many subtle times you're like, oh, I'm so stupid, or whatever. And the brain doesn't know any better. The brain believes everything you tell it, right? So I definitely think it's not an easy quick tip, but I think it's to like clock your self-talk and start, you know, from day one looking up stuff. How can I talk to myself better? How can I be kinder to myself? How can I prove to myself that I can do certain things? And then I suppose a super quick tip, double your time for everything. So every time, like, I plan out my day at the start of the day, I write down this is what I'm going to do, and I double the expected time for every single thing.
Oh, that's so
and
funny.
The best thing that can happen is you'll finish early, or you'll just have given yourself more leeway. But time blindness is super real, and stop, like, especially with things like transition times. Like, I'm really bad at being like, okay, I have 15 minutes to get to this place, so I'll leave at 20 minutes, forgetting that I'm like, okay, how long realistically we clock up, get your keys, get your jacket, get there, parking, walk to the place. Do you know what I mean? Stuff like this. So always, it's just easier just to double your time for sure.
I love that.
I have a time warp that exists between, I live 2 stories up, and between me leaving my top door and me getting in the car, there's some sort of thing that drains like 15 minutes of my time. I'll be like, oh, it's 1:30, I'm going to go to the gym. And I'm like, oh, I'm 15 minutes late. And it is like my keys, my shoes, my coat, like my bag. It's, our time things.
I can offer you slightly late or extremely early. There's nothing that I can
not
really
on time
between.
That's how I operate as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm constantly sending Maddie messages out and they go, just
I'll be on in 10 minutes.
I'll be on in 10.
Yeah.
Just give me 5.
We give ourselves a lot of time to do this.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, and that's, I think, when you circle back to like the friend groups and stuff like that, like why it can be more prevalent is because people that are chronically, terminally late, as I call them, tend to hang out together because it's more forgiving. Do you know what I mean? Like I actually will actively be almost like furious with somebody if they expect me to be on time. I'm like, what are you talking about? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mess people around. Things like appointments, things like, oh, we're meeting for dinner at this place. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm there, I'm on, I'm going to be early. But you know, if I'm like, oh, I'll be there about 6, I'd say, if it's a party or something. If I get a text message from somebody at like 6:30 being like, where are you? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is a non-urgent event. I am on my way. Like, and likewise, it kind of is, you know, shared amongst the group, but we make up for it in other ways. You want people who are understanding of the quirks of our existence. No, that makes sense.
I'm going to big up your platform, Conor, because it's unbelievable. And I sent you a big rambling voice note that was about a 20-minute podcast to tell you this. I'm going to share this publicly again. But I was very lucky to get a little sneak peek a while ago into your platform, and I haven't done hair for a couple of years, and it literally like made me want to do hair, because I was like, this is so engaging.
Thank you.
You had thought about everything, like when you say, you know, we think about the learning styles. One of the bits that I loved is that you do a voice note to like summarize the lesson, but exactly as you say, it's like storytelling, and it was like, you know, Connor's my mate, and he's just sent me a voice note, and it's like, oh my god, I had this client in today, like let me tell you about it. And it was just the visuals, like, you know, because we can teach people like color, and then you know, in a day, in a workshop or whatever, in person, and then expect them to go and be able to do that 6 months later, whereas you give them like the cliff notes, the images, the voice note, and you just make it, you're a phenomenal educator anyway, but you make it just easy in so many ways. And I just can't, I feel like you've completely blown open education, and I'm going back on, right, how can I make my stuff really like accessible? And I really hope that other people notice this shift and go, we need to do what Connor's doing, because it's just, I just can't say how much I loved it. So
thank
props.
You so much for that.
And it's hard work.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's such hard work, because we're still figuring it out. We're still just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it's a lot, like, we're very engaged with the community that are on it. Constantly being like, what works, what doesn't. But then, because then if you get too individual, then you could go insane. But you try to see like what certain things work. But you know what? The voice notes is so funny, because that was such a whim. We were going to do like a podcast, and I was like, Emma, I just know I'm not going to maintain a podcast. Like, I just physically, I'm not going to lie to myself and say I will. So I was like, I just want to try these little voice clips. Or I actually went on a walk and did like the voice note. So I like put myself into like, you know, what's that, method acting. I was like, I've just got to the salon. I watched the video, and I'm like, I'm going to send it as if I'm sending it to like Katrina or Lisa or one of my, you know, hairdressing friends. And I just stuck it up, and actually that was the quickest thing I did. As in, it's not even edited. It's just a streaming thought of consciousness done like a story. The videos take me days to edit. Emma has to do the resources for days, uploading it. Voice now, I send it on, she puts it up, and that is the one that everyone was like, oh my God. So it's a great addition to have it there, and it kind of actually makes sometimes people skip straight to that, and then because it references the videos, that kind of go back and watch, and it feels a bit more like exploratory and on their terms, as opposed to being forced to just like, you know, do a tutorial or whatever. But I'm really glad you benefited from it. Thanks so much. We have gotten pretty good feedback overall. And we're still in the early days with some really exciting stuff next year for how we're going to kind of generate the content with the type of models we're using, the filming, the social media assets and stuff. So now we're still in discovery, but it's going really well. It's a nice consistent number. So hopefully we can continue to share that and continue to make people feel more like welcome and invited in these kind of learning spaces.
Honestly, it's incredible. Can you just tell people where they can find you or where they can find your education? And we'll put a link in the show notes as well for you.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm Conor with one N, which is always spelled wrong.
I tell you, that trips me up a lot when I'm looking for you on Instagram.
I know, and I'm like, do you know what? I don't even blame you, because your autocorrect will do it and stuff as well. As long as I get Conor, that's fine. But then loads of people started calling me James. It's my like, it's double barreled my name. Yeah, but you'd be amazed at the amount of messages I get there, like, hey James, and I'm like, James here. So yeah, I'm Conor James Doyle. My social medias are Conor 1N JMD, and then there's Conor James Education, which is our Instagram for the education. And both of those pages do have links to the platform, or you can go on to learnwithme.conorjameseducation if you want to check it out. It is a rolling subscription. You can join and cancel as frequently or as infrequently as you want. We're hoping to expand a couple of different options within that soon as well. But yeah, social media is generally the best to find me. There is emails and stuff you can ping over to me. I do not manage them. I am forbidden from my inbox. But, someone will do it. Yeah, somebody else will catch it at some point. But yeah, that's where I can be found.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Thank you.
It sounds so brilliant. I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I really love that we're thinking about making education more accessible. Like Maddie said, I'm thinking about how I'm going to do that a bit more. I've noticed that I've started thinking about that more and more. And I think it'll be brilliant if this is something that really catches on industry wide, for sure. for sure.
Yeah. And it's just about more so acknowledging that all the different brains that could be consuming than necessarily specific. Because I've had a couple of people write to me and they're like, so I don't have ADHD. Is this still good for me? I'm like, yeah, because it's still going to have all the qualities are built on the key things of novelty, dopamine, efficiency. And actually, we really wanted to make sure we didn't snook ourselves into a neurodiverse exclusive kind of situation. Yeah. But actually, that's why whenever I'm talking to brands and stuff, and they were like, oh, we'd love to get you to do education, I'm like, everybody benefits from this.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is you're giving people a choice on how they want to learn. That's literally all that it's about.
And everybody likes fun.
Everybody, exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody's like,
fun and easy to digest.
Yeah. Nobody's like, oh God, that was like such a funny video on learning.
I hated it.
Yeah, I really would have liked something.
I'm sure there are. Maybe those people wouldn't be suited.
Yeah. Just make it more dry. I'd really like that.
Yeah.
And so, Conor,
I need another 10 minutes.
Yeah. We like to end every episode by discussing our hyper focus of the week. And so,
oh, great.
Yeah. And so I'd like to invite you to tell us what your hyper focus of the moment is.
Should we do ours so Conor can have some thinking time?
That sounds kind.
Well, I already know.
Oh, you know. Oh, okay. Go for it if you know. Even better.
So mine is tapestries at the minute.
Curveball.
So I have decided to make my room more comfortable and cozy because it's quite cold here at the moment. And I actually, a little good ADHD tip is actually take the easy things in life and make them even easier and make them even more like bougie and romantic and lovely and romanticize like small things. So like I now have my bedroom has like smart lights. Maybe that was a hyper focus as well. But like, so they're like smart lights. I have like a heated blanket that like comes on at certain times to wake me up. My lights wake me up instead of my alarm. And then I was like, well, I'm going to make it look more like a boho bougie room. So I've started looking into tapestries, which are actually really extensive. Yeah. Like tapestries are like a huge thing to get into. So yeah, I've been spending a lot of hours looking at tapestries and their origins over the last week. So that was that one.
Oh, have you looked at the tapestries that, his brain, Grayson Perry did?
No, but I will.
I just add a little tangent into that. Yeah, Grayson Perry did some massive tapestries as a project a few years ago, all about class. And so there's a working class tapestry and upper class tapestry. I saw them in person. Check that out, Conor, just as a little side quest of your tapestries.
Just to further add
if I could just feed into that. Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to buy them for your room. But they're fascinating.
Now I'm going to try out of pure stubbornness. I'm like, can I get like a cut of one of those, please?
What do you think, Grayson? What about you, Matt?
What are you your two?
Well, I feel wholly uncultured now because mine's what's the opposite end of tapestry? Selling Sunset. I am honestly, I was such a reality TV reluctant person because I was one of those arseholes who was like, oh, I'm not watching Towie or Chelsea or whatever. It is the best mindless TV. I'm like slagging off $20 million penthouses. I'm like, oh, there's too many windows. I don't like the bar. I'm in. Yeah, it's too much. I'm into it. I've accidentally learned all of the names. I know all the drama. I'm trying to pull Aidan in, like he's kind of getting amongst it now. So I'm in. I'm just embracing
it. I purposely won't watch reality TV because I know that it's a vacuum for me.
Really badly. Yeah. That's mine.
I'm all over Selling Sunset, Maddie, and I'd like to add selling the OC into your repertoire.
It's like it's the same guys who opened up in
same people, but it's a different office. I might even say it's a little bit better. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay. I'll get on it.
And I was like, I'm not watching that. It won't be as good. It is.
Better.
It is.
Drama. Right, I'm in.
My
You've really set the bar now.
It's completely different than both of yours as well. My hyper focus is my new soup maker. And so I'm completely obsessed with making soup for two reasons. Like I bought a soup maker, which is like a kettle that heats it and blends it in 20 minutes. So ease, because I don't like cooking because it takes too many steps thinking about it, buying it, chopping it. It's too much. But I also think it's a really good way for me to get vegetables into my mouth on a regular basis. This is what I've decided. if I make a soup a week of veg, this will solve all my health problems. So there you go.
I love it.
I can't see why it wouldn't.
I
Yeah.
can't see why it's not going to
I go
work.
through phases with specific food things as well. It's normally if I find a certain recipe, I'm like, I'm going to make this every single
Yeah.
day for the rest of my life.
I've had TikTok air fryer garlic bread. I've had it every day since like February. Every single, and when I go on holiday, I'm like, oh my god! I nearly bought an air fryer in LA because I was there for 5 weeks, and I was like, I can't have my. It's just on it, but I'm obsessed. But one day it'll just go away. I'll be like, I can never eat that again. But I'll probably do a year.
I've eaten a cheese and onion Breville toasty for about 6 months now, every day.
It's such easy food.
Consistency.
It's not fading.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
But and you know, again, it's so funny when I reflect back to my childhood. My mother was the exact same. She would come home with some new gadget, like a steamer or a pressure cooker or whatever, and she'd be like, "Everyone," and that would be it for weeks. And we'd be like, oh, "I'm so sick of steamed vegetables," or like a stew maker. We had like literally like pre-chewed type food for months because she bought a stew maker and was determined to get like the use out of it. No, I fully get that. But mine, tapestries at the minute. And once I've financially ruined myself, I'll probably move on to something else.
We'll do a rotation, and I'll take the tapestries, and you maybe get into Sun and Sunset. Thank you so much, Conor. Honestly, it's been really so nice to hear your side of things, and as our first ever guest.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you.
Thanks for being our first great guest.
It's been nice and cozy.
Lush. All right, enjoy. Happy tapestry hunting.
Thanks very much. Happy selling sunset.
See you later.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments.
Please support those who support us, and check out Timely, who we recommend as our favourite booking system for you. New customers can get 50% off their first 3 months with the code COFFEE50.